Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Vigilate Dialogues. I'm your host, Shaina Smith Archer, inviting you, or welcoming you rather, to the National Boardroom. If you are new to our program, Vigilante is the Virgin Islands national motto, and it means to be watchful. Our mission is to have dialogue or conversations about issues affecting our quality of life and how we solve them. The Vigilante Dialogues is broadcast live here on Facebook and YouTube on the first and third Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. and replayed on CBN Radio FM 90.9 in the Virgin Islands. Tonight's topic, we're going to be talking about building a better Virgin Islands. And to do so, of course, I had to go and pull out some of my architect and engineer friends to come and join us this evening to talk about how we're building the BVI. And it's not just in terms of construction, but different aspects of it. I'm going to probably do a series talking about this. But before we go any further, I'm going to pause here and allow my friends to introduce themselves. So, starting with Mr. Smith, go right ahead. You're on mute, sir.
Sorry about that. Good evening, folks. My name is Bennet Smith, engineer in retirement. Let me put it that way. Is not enough, Shane? I thought I'd introduce myself.
Well, okay, so for those who may not know, we want to think that a lot of people know you because you have been around for so many years. But tell them a little bit more in terms of your background.
Okay. I spent. Well, let me put it this way. I graduated from the University of the West Indies with a degree in engineering, civil engineering, way back in 1968. I spent most of my working life with Public Works Department, and that attachment to Public Works Department ended in 2000. In 1998, really. And then I spent some time as a permanent secretary, and I remain as a permanent secretary in the Premier's office and in the Ministry of Health, for all places, until I retired from public service. Then I went back as project manager on the People's Hospital. I had actually spent time before as project manager. I was sort of on secondment from my public works employment with the Port Development Project. And that's where we really built the cruise pier, improved the main port in Road Town, and also in Spanish Town, Virgin Gorda. At the same time, we built the college. So, that's essentially my working life.
The short version of your resume.
Yeah, and right, and I've been pretty much in retirement since 2013. That's 9 years ago.
Yeah, about that. Yeah. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So, Miss Liburd, you're up next.
Hi there. Okay, my name is Lavina Liburd. I am an architect in independent practice based here in the British Virgin Islands. I have projects here and in St. Kitts Nevis. With my team of consultants, we do residential, multifamily, and commercial projects at medium scale. I've also been heavily involved with the Rotary Club of Road Town and the Rotary Clubs of the BVI since soon after arriving in the BVI back in 2007. And so I've always been engaged in community development here in the BVI and elsewhere that I've lived. That's an ongoing theme for me. So thank you for inviting me this evening, Shaina. I'm sure we're going to have a very lively and fruitful discussion.
Thank you. All right, my good friend Marvin.
Thank you, Shaina, and really thank you for the invite to join your show. My name is Marvin Flax Jr. I am an architect. I'm the managing director of the BVI OBMI office. We do primarily residence architecture, hospitality, hotels, a lot of master planning work, some commercial, a little bit of everything really. I have, gosh, I'm not sure how many years I've been practicing architecture, but it's probably approaching 20 plus.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love what I do. I'm a past president of the Rotary Club Sunrise of Rotown. And yeah, that's it. I could tell you more, but let's move on to
Yeah, we're
Mark.
not gonna talk about the kite you didn't build. Okay.
Yeah, let's not talk about that. Actually, we should maybe a different show.
A
That was a lot
different,
of
yeah,
fun.
that'll be a different build. All right, no problem.
You have to invite Addie though.
Okay, no problem. All right, Marquise.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And again, I'd like to thank Shaina for inviting me to have the dialogue tonight about building or constructing a BBI for tomorrow. My name is Marquese Maduro. I'm an engineer by profession. I have degrees in civil engineering and environmental engineering, and I serve as the director of project management and construction solutions, which primarily focuses on, as mentioned in the title, project management and development and overseeing such, as well as I've provided facilities management in the past for the port and project management for the Ministry of Finance. And at one point, as a waste management officer, because of my environmental background. And currently, I would say I moonlight as a restaurant owner along with my wife. We own a taco restaurant, Trade Winds Mexican Grill. So I would say that based on my background, that getting into that venture is more like moonlighting, but fun nonetheless. And I've enjoyed it so far. So again, Shina, thank you, and I hope the viewers enjoy.
And thank you to all of you guys for accepting my invitation. I know sometimes we as engineers and architects, we like to stay behind the scenes. So sometimes it's like, I don't know. So I'm happy you guys are here. So guys, we have all been around construction of physical infrastructure for some time. So I've been doing this since 2003, similar to Marquise and Bennet in terms of starting out in the public service and then moving into the private sector. So as Marquis says, it's fun. We enjoy doing what we have to do. But then sometimes, it's amazing when you get to walk around and see what you built. And I know for Bennet, he gets fulfillment and joy out of seeing those many projects that he's touched over the years. So Marquis and I are just getting started compared to his what I know, because we've sat and had several conversations when we were building the new hospital building. I was his assistant project engineer. So I was really happy for that opportunity to be a part of that team. And, every time I look at the hospital, it's like, it's amazing from, I remember walking through the steel frame building to what you have now, with all the services. I still tell all my family and friends I didn't build it for them. So y'all stay out. You don't need to be in there. But if you do, the joy is that we have it if it's needed. And that was one of the biggest things for me in terms of the upgrade of our healthcare facilities. So what I want us to talk about tonight was, and all of us have had probably one-on-one conversations about this topic in terms of how we are developing our country. And one of the questions I actually posted on Facebook when I put it up was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are we doing from a development standpoint, whether from your particular field or as a citizen of the country? Let's pick up on that, and then we're gonna jump into some of the other stuff. So who wants to start first? Bennet, since you have the longest timeline, because you've seen most of it more than some of us, and the progress that's happened over the last 50 years or so.
Well, for me, I kind of saw it start from nothing, and I'm serious because if we go back to the mid 50s, we weren't doing anything, so we didn't need to to plan anything hardly. We didn't. In those days we were poor, and I really mean we were poor. We didn't have money like we have now. We had a small population. Um, we didn't. There really wasn't a lot that needed to be managed or controlled, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
Basically, people would agree that we were a subsistence economy. Now, it sounds funny to say that back in the mid 50s was a subsistence economy, but we were. And there wasn't anything to plan. The roads in those days, we could drive as from Sicau's Bay. I think in the early 50s, we managed to cut a trail, you could drive a jeep to East End and eventually to West End again, like in the mid 50s.
Mhm.
Um, you couldn't go over the hill to Cairngad any place. We only had electricity from, let me see, hospital to the burial ground. Um, yeah, it was that kind of situation. There wasn't much going on. If you also recall that in those days, things like land tenure weren't what they are now.
Mhm.
We didn't have surveys and so on the way we now. We used to have these old deeds that people used to talk about where you would define boundaries by a gut or a big rock or the old
Mhm.
lignan whitey stump or something like that. And if I could recall, Public Works didn't even have somebody like a surveyor. There wasn't a planning department. There wasn't a uh, building inspector until I think Mr. Malone, Leslie Malone, was appointed as a building inspector. Probably around this would probably have been around 1960 or so. And so there was absolutely no control of anything like that. So if you look at it from my perspective, I mean, the difference between what we had then and what we have now is like 100% on a scale to 1 to 10. We
Yeah.
went from nothing to something.
Mhm.
But so that's one aspect of it, and maybe I could go a little more into that because it's interesting, when we see it develop over the years from where we only had a building inspector, then we introduced a little planning when things started to happen. I would have to say that with all the nasty things we say about Wickhamski, maybe Wickhamski spoiled a lot of the controls and so on because it was a planned development. It didn't take place the way it was planned by the developers,
Mhm.
but it was a planned development. People would say that, of course, they had planned to put us
Exclude.
on a reservation, if you want to put
Mhm.
it that way.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it was planned, and after government took it over, then it was again planned as a development. So, and then of course there were places like Little Dix Bay, which the resort,
Mhm.
in Virgin Gorda. Before that, we really had, a few little guest houses, Treasure Isle, maybe Fort Boat, maybe something on Marina Key, but we didn't have hotels as such or any such kind of development. And if you consider again that we also had back in 1969, 70, we had the cadastral survey where an effort was made to really define boundaries in a reasonably accurate way, as apart from saying down the middle of the gut, because I don't know who knew where the middle of the gut is.
Mhm.
But that's the way we used to define boundaries along the ridge. But with the cadastral back in 69 or 70, we actually started getting more accurate boundary definitions. So people could define their property a lot more easily, and you could more easily do transactions and so on. And again, if you consider architects, we really had no use for architects in the 50s because we weren't building anything.
Mhm.
Engineers, not in the sense that we have them now. If I recall, um, say something like the courthouse, which was built in the 50s, or the admin building, the original admin building would have been before that. But because then we were just what they call a presidency of the Leeward Islands, a lot of this work was done in Antigua.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow I think Clarence Christian had at least good drafting skills. He could design a building, and he could draw a building in a nice way that that somebody could use it, and he could maybe do simple structural design and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to that, I don't know that early we would have had Mr. Franklin before. That would have been probably in the early 50s. I didn't really know him a lot. I knew Mr. Christian quite well. In fact, I used to go there. And then, of course, in terms of real architectural design, we would have started with somebody like William Penn, who is still alive in Puerto Rico. He's Marlene Penn Stratmon's brother. He's still in Puerto Rico. I don't know how active he is. Last time I saw him, he seemed quite physically strong to me. But he was trained in Puerto Rico under the .4 program, and he was a good draftsman. I mean, he was trained as a draftsman. It didn't take long. Ira followed him after a little while, but of course, both of them, I think, went on to study architecture formally. Bill Penn didn't return. He stayed in Puerto Rico, but Ira came home. Paul Watley came soon after him. And just about that time, which would have been just around the 70s when the development started, we started getting people like Onions Bouchard, is that name familiar? Coming into the coming in because and people like Jay Story and partners who were involved with surveying and so on. Around that time, when the Wickhamski development, I think, attracted a lot of attention to BVI as a potential a place with development potential, and that's, I think, where everything started. Okay. And then, of course, we had I think UNDP. We got a planner, Ove Anderson. I don't know if you ever heard that name. He was Scandinavian, probably Swedish or Norwegian, I don't recall. And he got involved with setting up the planning department. Prior to that, the building inspector, I am not sure there was a building ordinance of some sort, but I don't think there were many regulations, and there really wasn't a lot of control. And I still think maybe planning, we could still do a lot better. We still haven't developed a well understood, universally accepted, as well as could ever universally, national development plan. We haven't even developed a proper national development strategy. So yes, I think we have a long way to go. But I say that saying that
we've come
at one point we were moving fairly quickly. We probably slow down now, and we've come a long way in about 50 years. We've come a long way. But I think we're lagging behind. We should be further on, really. There's no excuse for being where we are. I'll stop there for them. I mean, that was a long drawn out thing.
Historical thing. All of us are hearing because it's really some of the names I've heard A.C. Franklin, because I've actually read that in a book. So I know that name sounds familiar, but it's like for many of us.
Which one was that?
A.C. Franklin.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I read it in a history book. But it's
Franklin,
something where...
Yeah, that was Elroy Franklin's father.
Okay. So
Elroy
it's like
Franklin's father, yeah.
Yeah, the BVI we met is something that we take for granted, that there wasn't a road. They were not Joe's Hill. I remember when the Royal Navy blasted actually for the coastal road so that we could drive around the
West End, the coastal road. Exactly.
And when that went in,
we used to go over the we used to go over the hill before, but I mean it's you know what it is like now, so it wasn't even that good because it wasn't paved.
I remember the road was rough. So it's like those conveniences now that have come on. Marvin, what's your thoughts as an architect? I mean, I think Bennet probably spoke for us all when we're saying we think we've come a long way. There's been a lot of progress.
Yeah.
But the need for I would say the plan. We've heard a lot of talk in the past about I think it's a national physical development plan, not to be confused with the national sustainable development plan. But the two do need to marry, because whatever you're building from a socio-economic standpoint, it has to have the physical infrastructure to support it. So what are your thoughts in terms of what you've seen over the years?
Yeah, thank you. I would say the infrastructure is probably lacking the most. As a designer, as I mean, yes, I'm an architect, but I tend to use the word designer more often than architect. Partly because I'm into aesthetics. Any object, anything has some design thought put into it, right? So one of the first things I see, just driving from the airport to town, just the visual of how the place looks. The roads, you know, in some spots are good, in some spots they're not. Um, the, the a lot of derelict vehicles are all over the place. There's an aesthetic to it. There's a certain look, and it's not necessarily a criticism. It's just what I see, what we see. That I think over time you almost sort of you come to, which I'm shocked about what to say is, but you almost accept it as this is normal.
We become blind to all the cars piled up on the side.
Yeah, your eyes become normal to it. You're like, okay, there's another car that has a sticker on it that has been told to move. That's never going to move. And those responsibility that falls upon, you know, the government of the day, and obviously they're very stretched, and there's a certain capacity that they have to do certain things. So then it falls back on the community as well, right? The community we have to take a lot of responsibility as well, for I guess cleaning up after ourselves, having a little more thought as to how is this going to look. I mean, just driving around the island, you see a house that's really close to a road. Not to get too detailed, but these things I see, right? It's really close to a boundary or a road. You see that there is some leaching going on from the house that comes onto the road. That road is perpetually damaged from that same continuous fluid. And this isn't just something you're seeing from a 6-month stretch. You're talking about years of seeing this in the same exact spots. I mean, and so our infrastructure is lacking. I've made a few posts on Facebook really about our airlift. I think our airlift is also lacking. That goes to, I think, our overall infrastructure and long-term development goals or plans of the BVI. Our regional island competitors are there. We're one of 2 islands in the Caribbean that does not have direct airlift to the U.S. St. Bart's, they're the size of probably Virgin Gorda and probably don't have the terrain to do it. We have to sort of create some terrain to make ours, you know, supposedly longer for longer jets, but you know, for me, it's really the aesthetic of how things look. It doesn't look harmonious. It doesn't look clean. Again, not everywhere, right? There's some places that seem to have done a good job. I mean, I think Road Town has actually come a long way. Still needs, you know, a lot of work, but there's strides made, and I admire the efforts made, and you just need to sort of continue those. And again, if there's a plan and a strategy that targets areas sort of systematically, and you know, if obviously as residents we don't always have the cash flow to maintain and keep up our properties, but the ones that are really close to the main thoroughfares, the main roads, that obviously we're a tourist destination. Again, the visual, right? If there's a way where, you know, there are some cash incentives or tax incentives to help the property owner to, you know, maintain their property on a regular basis, and there's some incentive driven policy to assist, that could work.
Okay.
But I mean, I've had a good experience working with our planners, our planning department, our public works department. I mean, they do a lot of good work. I think they're understaffed and sometimes overly criticized. My experience with them thus far, and I've been back in the BVI about 13 years, has been positive, really. There's always room for improvement, always. And I think the BVI is, I was talking to my wife about this a few days ago, that we're resilient people here in the BVI. We all know what we went through 5 years ago, right? And then what the world has gone through for the past 2 years. So we've taken it on the chin, and I think we are primed and ready for a rebirth, for an emergence, to really excel as a territory. And I don't mean just from a development standpoint, but just culturally, socially, economically. And I think we have a lot of potential. And I just think to bring it back to a topic, development has a huge way to sort of uplift the territory and attract investment and whatnot. So I see it maybe more glass half full than half empty.
And that's good, because that means we have something to build on.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm born and raised here. I grew up here. I've seen it from I won't express to you my age, but we've come a long way.
It went from like I remember when 3 stories was a very tall building.
Yeah.
And since then we basically doubled in size and still growing. So
yeah,
it's amazing to see. All right, I have a question for you actually about that, and we'll actually, but I'll put it in later. I'll let Marquese jump in here and give us his thoughts.
I think so far Mr. Smith and Mr. Flax have touched on quite a bit of the issues that I've seen, and one from Mr. Smith would be the lack of a plan, which ties into Mr. Flax's point of aesthetics, because I believe you have to plan for those things. It isn't just about having the place look clean, but having something orderly is because it fits in the right place. Sometimes even though something may not look bad, if it sometimes it's an eyesore, sorry, not because it has a scent or doesn't look well, but because it just isn't placed well. And I think that goes back. So I think the 2 points there tie in very much so, because we need to be able to look at our population. Mr. Smith gave us a very good summary of where we were. Many of those things long before my time. But we have to be able to look at where we're trying to go, and not just for tomorrow or not just for next year. But I think a lot of things, to me, from me being maybe the younger one on the panel, is a lot of things we come to deal with now, and you just don't understand what was the logic. And I understand no one could have a crystal ball to know all of what will happen. But the BVI, as mentioned prior, is developing, and we have to assume with development that we're still, I think, in the early stages of development. Even though we would have talked about 50 years ago, I still think we have a lot of opportunities where we have both us locals and persons outside that would have ideas for what they want to do. And some of the things, Marvin talked about along the road, but we can even go to our substructure. And I find, maybe because I'm an engineer, the substructure right now is being stretched. We had an issue there by right way Passer the other day, where we realized maybe the lines that were put down many years ago, and the minister spoke about it, they are in need of changing. And those are the things, before we even getting to the aesthetics, which is very, very crucial for our parents. We need to it's like fixing the bones, making sure that you don't dress up your car, like you have a cast on your leg, but then if your leg is still broken, we could make the cast look really pretty, but then you still can't walk straight. And I think those are the issues that we're having. And just to identify one, which ties back into aesthetics, but is a functionality problem, I remember maybe in 2012, I maybe have the year off, or maybe even maybe 2014, we did a variety of sewage works in Rotom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all along the one stop mall corridor, we had dug it up and we put in the high density polyurethane lines for the sewage to go from the main pumping station all the way down to Board Point. But what I can't understand, and it goes to Marvin's point about aesthetics, with the main pumping station being there, I understand the sewage has to collect in one area and then be sent down to the plant. But we have trucks to this day discharging sewage that has been brought from around the territory in the middle of town. I mean, you're talking about taxis and stuff that are passing there by Bantapool, and we have these different trucks discharging in town where we had the opportunity to, let's say, discharge maybe down at the plant directly.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that more bothers me with the development, is I find we deal with things in isolations versus, like, again,
Mm-hmm.
as Mr. Smith said, coming up with a plan and looking at it and saying, okay, what are all aspects that will be necessary to go into these things so that in 2 years we're not digging the road up, or we're not saying that we put down a 4-inch line, but now we need a 6-inch or 8-inch line. We
Mm-hmm.
have to be bold as a territory to decide, listen, we're going to go ahead and put on that 8-inch line because we know the BVI is second to none, and we know the development going to come and we're going to need that 8-inch line. We have
Mm-hmm.
to call that shot. And
Yeah.
I the tentativeness in what we have done over the years is what is costing us in development. It's like we want to get on the wall stage and talk about a developing country, but when we need to make the decisions and spend the money accordingly, we don't. We have to believe in what it is we're selling, and to believe that we have to be properly reinforced. And I
Yeah.
think that is the issue with the development. And the last thing I'll even say is, like, one of the things, because Marvin alluded to a point he made on Facebook, and I'd like to bring up my own point again about something not to me being in the right place. And I know that we're currently rebuilding the market, and I know for some persons that area has historical value. But I'm sure Mr. Smith could back me up. That wasn't even the original location of the market. The market used to be down at Waterfront.
Waterfront. Yeah.
And my thing is, sometimes I think one of the issues with our development strategies is we get emotionally hanged up on where we put these things. But
Mm-hmm.
we're not looking at, okay, well, maybe the market solved well in the area by the roundabout maybe 20, 30 years ago. But do we need to put the market back where it is not there, where we
In a
have
commercial area.
high-rise buildings and we have lack
Mm-hmm.
of parking?
Mm-hmm.
My little point on that, and I'm not saying that I am the best person, but my solution was, where you go down past Rotom Ferry Terminal, you pass the parking lot across from where I think Mr. Smith, you guys would have used it as a staging area for the hospital. I think we could have put the market down there, and I think because we own the waterfront, we could have set up a seaside dock, and the fisheries could have been on the seaside and the market on the land side. And when you go to shop on a Saturday, you would have had ample parking for persons to come. So when Marvin comes to buy his fish and collect his fungi and everything, he could do everything in one place, one-stop shop, and it wouldn't have been congested in the middle of town. But
Yeah.
again, we have to be able to have these bold arguments, and we have to be able to, it's like rolling the dice, but it's us, and we have to roll the dice on us when we talk about development. That's my 2 cents.
Awesome. All right. Well said. And I agree with that. But I had never thought about that. But that might be a good place for the market indeed. All right. Lavina.
I'm okay. It's very interesting because between Mr. Smith and Marvin and Marquise, we really touched on a lot of things. And one of the things that's always been a passion of mine is functionality. And Marquise touched on this in terms of the infrastructure and the wider environment. And I need to touch on it in terms of buildings. Bearing in mind what Mr. Smith said, there was nothing, say, in the 50s, and then we went to 3-story buildings and 6-story buildings. But we're still building 6-story buildings like they're 2-story buildings, right? And there was a need, obviously, with the economic changes to fit the people in.
Mm-hmm.
But the function of buildings has to go beyond warehousing people. One of the challenges that I hear a lot about or have heard a lot about over the past 15 or so years that I've been here, especially in Road Town, is buildings making people sick, which is something that came up earlier in the States in the 70s in terms of sick building syndrome, right? And of course, with the BVI coming to development a little bit later, let's say this came up in the 90s when the buildings started to age past 20 years or so, some of the older buildings. And people take it lightly, but the fact is, when you shut down a building totally, air condition it, don't have any fresh air exchange, trap moisture, trap the pollutants from people breathing in and out, it's going to make people sick. What I can't remember if it was the US Green Building Council or the Harvard University study that talks about the air inside buildings is one of the most toxic things that gets people cancer. Uh, I know people personally that have gotten mold in their lungs from working inside buildings in Road Town. And obviously it's a growing process, right? Because these are things that people wouldn't have been aware of when this development started. It was like, okay, we're building this financial services industry. Lots of people are coming here to work. We need places for them to work. We need to respond, build some buildings, earn some money, get the country moving. But as both Marvin and Marquise said, and Mr. Smith, once you get past that initial stage, you have to start thinking more broadly about functionality, more broadly about planning, zoning, what should be in town, what should not be in town, what areas of the country do we want to direct certain industries to? Because the idea that everything has to be in and around Road Town, that's going to hurt the BVI in the long term. Like I've seen it happen in St. Kitts, where I'm originally from, where at a certain point, everything has to be in Bastyr. And it doesn't work.
You run out of room.
You get crazy congestion. Traffic becomes impossible. And we're seeing that now in Road Town as well, right? Crazy congestion, traffic is impossible, parking is impossible. The rerouting of traffic that they did recently really eased things up a lot. But cars are like litter everywhere, not just the non-functional ones. The functional ones are parked on sidewalks, so people can't walk on safely. They have to walk in the street. They're parked in green areas. They're parked anywhere you can get a spot to kuchin, right? And that goes back to, again, the functioning of the built environment, the functioning of the infrastructure. Yes, we needed to get it. We needed to get it working for the changes that were happening. We're at that point where it's gone as far as it can go, I feel like, in its current state. And now the thinking has to be broader, both in terms of infrastructure and in terms of buildings. Because, and I can't hammer this home enough, we literally have buildings that are making people sick, not by any intention of the owners, not by any intention of the builders, but because we're adopting these technologies like air conditioning. We're adding in different types of materials that maybe we didn't use in the past, soft goods like carpets. We want the place a little nicer. We're bringing a different kind of wallpaper. We might try a different type of, countertop or cabinetry material. And we're not paying attention to the fact that buildings have to breathe.
Yeah.
And that all these materials we're using put off chemicals into the air, that if you're not getting them out of the building somehow, if it's just, I know I'm getting a little detailed, but we use a lot of these split system air conditioners that move refrigerant and don't move air.
So that's like the wall units.
Right.
Okay.
Or even the ceiling cassettes, they don't move air. They move refrigerant. So unless you're providing a way for air exchange in these buildings, for the stale air to be taken out, fresh air to be brought in, you can clean as much as you want.
Yeah.
It's not gonna change the fact. And that's just on one level.
Yeah.
We have to think of functioning of buildings on a whole other level as well. Marquis said, what should be where? Do we really need a sewage pumping station in town, right? Can that be somewhere else? Do we really need every type of industry to be concentrated near town? We've kind of seen it in the hospitality industry, where you only have a few sort of business-oriented hotels in town, and the resorts that are more vacation-oriented are out at the edges, far from the madding crowd where it's peaceful and quiet, right? So that's an appropriate location for that type of business. Because we don't have any zoning and because so much of the land is privately held, it can be harder to put zoning in. You will see a nice residence next to a mechanic's garage, right? You will see a home next to a construction yard because that's where the person had the land and that's where they put their business.
Yeah.
Right? Elsewhere in the world, you have zoning that says certain uses and certain functions, especially if they're dealing with toxic materials, cannot be in a residential area, right? Needs to be in a designated area where these things can be contained and kept from harming people. We've had all these conversations over the years about the cancer rates in the BVI, right? A lot of people have focused on the incinerator issue, which again, yes, you have this incinerator, whether it's properly maintained and functioning or not is kind of besides the point because their residence is right around it.
Yeah.
And the wind blows a certain way. So it could be functioning perfectly and you're still going to be exposed to a lot of carcinogens.
Yeah.
So between building regulations that go beyond does it stand up and does it fit the right number of people and have the right number of parking spots, in a lot of places you have regulations that go into, well, how many air exchanges per hour, you know. And my friend Madam Massicat said I need to give him a shout out on this on the MEP side. I said I wouldn't, but it came up. So there you go. IDS BVI, where you're dealing with what number of air exchanges do you need per hour to maintain the health of the people involved. If you have a toxic use nearby your office building, how do you make sure that the fresh air you're bringing in is not actually making the problem worse?
Yeah.
There's so much to it that goes beyond just the basic regulations.
Yeah.
And listen, every country in the world has gotten to a certain point and then played catch up. We had devastating Hurricane Irma in 2017. I remember reading back in my history of architecture days how after the Chicago fire, which wiped out most of Chicago, they changed the building codes to promote brick because they were building multi-story buildings in wood, 5-6-story buildings in wood. And that fire just raised through the town. So throughout human history, it's taken disasters to make us change our ways, rethink what we are doing, look at the situation, what caused the problem, and do something better. We've had one. We've had discussions about what building code is the best to adopt to update the planning guidelines from 1972. And I don't know when the existing building code was from. I know there have been attempts to put new planning codes into place. Marvin, if you know, you can tell me whether they've actually been passed because they were circulated for review. But again, this has happened before where new guidelines are circulated for review and then they never get passed into law. I'm going to let Marvin answer on that one. Do you know?
I shouldn't have unmuted my mic. No, I'm joking. I don't think it has, to be honest with you.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still in discussion stage.
Still in discussion, yeah, as far as I know. Yeah.
And that's a problem. We're talking about 1972. How far has the BVI come from 1972?
Yeah.
How far has the BVI come even from 2017 where just about everything was destroyed? Right? So we need new codes in place. Elsewhere in the I practiced.
And I don't want to just interject there because you touched on something that was very important. I know a lot of times we have a culture that, I don't know, we resist regulation, especially when it comes to our or what we perceive to be our property, right? And you know, that discussion, I think we might go leave it still being had about you know, whether or not we should have zones in terms of how we do the development. And there's an interesting comment in the chat I'm going to pop up on the screen in a bit that Noni made. But I think one of the key things for us coming out of the 2017 hurricanes, which, you know, ties into your illustration of Chicago, is about public health and safety.
Yes.
Has to become a very integral part of what we do going forward in our physical development. Because, you know, going to what Marquese mentioned about the pump out and all these leaks and breakdown that we keep having of our sewage system. The other day when I drove into, I went to a business out on the Road Reef Marina, and I literally had to drive through a pond of basically septic water coming out of the public sewer. The sad part for me was it was there in the afternoon when I was going home, and it was still there in the morning. And it's when something was said about it, whether on social media or the radio, then water and sewage, pops up at the manhole up above it. I guess is where they have to pump out from, and of course they drove back up the road to the roundabout to pump it out. So I think these things have become so commonplace for us. We have literally now accepted it, because it's almost as if sometimes we feel we've thrown our hands up and saying, oh well, we can do better, and that for me is unacceptable. As a citizen, I pay too much taxes to be driving through a pond of septic water. I'm just going to throw that out there, and say we really have to do better, in terms of our overall plan and strategy. And as a priority, start with the broken pieces. We know that in town overall, the sewer system, we've been talking about that for 20 years. And a new system or new pipes were put down. But I don't think we're using these new pipes. And what I don't understand is why not? I don't know if anybody can help me out on that, because we're still on the old system that is constantly has to be pumped out, all the time. Anybody know if we
I
are
think
new system
I,
or it's partly new, partly old?
I think there's the issue with sewage in the BVI is what you just said last is to my recollection is partly new and partly old. I think um from my recollection again is from the pump house in across from Vanderpool's at the roundabout down to Board Point, we had to put in the black lines, or we call them the HDP lines, that were introduced in, like I said, 2014. I think a lot of the other issues that we're having is that a lot of the sewage that comes into that pump house from other parts of Rotown, it flows by gravity in certain areas, and then they come to certain manholes, which then pump to the next manhole, depending on where the area is. Because low-lying areas, you can't rely on gravity. I think, as the minister said in his post recently after he corrected Passe, is a lot of these lines are old.
Mm.
And as we know, if you're familiar with sewage, it corrodes. Anything it meets, it corrodes it very easily. So we're having a lot of issues where, we need to look at the system, because it has probably been in place maybe 40 years, maybe like 30 years, and it is time to have it updated. And again, lack of maybe proper planning or vision at the time, we already met our capacity. So that is what causes some of these issues with the sewage.
Yeah.
And Lavina's point, I wouldn't say agree on that, but Lavina's point about air quality is one of the biggest problems that I think most big buildings, especially if they're more than 5 years old, it is. But I wouldn't, she has already elaborated on that, but I support her point.
Yeah, and I just popped up a comment from one of our viewers that it reinforces that. And I know that this person is a medical doctor, that they're seeing many people developing lung infections and hyperallergic conditions. So it's something where, again, public safety and health has to become one of those important things. Because another thing that's lacking in our building code, she mentioned about the fire, and we don't have a fire code as part of our building code as it stands now, as far as I know. And a lot is left to the integrity of my designers, such as Marvin and Lavina, to say that you guys know what best practice is. So therefore, you make recommendations to your clients to make sure they put certain things in place, and not just leave it to be, whatever is in the code. Because as you mentioned, 1972. So I don't want to date myself, but it's older than me.
Me too.
We had discussions after the hurricane of adopting a uniform code. If it's the International Building Code, or I know many of the structural engineers, or I shouldn't say many. That I know two that use the IBC in their design calculations as just typical best practice.
Mhm.
We do as well on anything commercial, hospitality. We work hand in hand with the fire protection, NFPA, IBC, and that just it's just when a project got started when I worked in the U.S. to me before you even started drawing anything, you
Yes,
were in the code. The code was dictating everything.
Mhm.
The type of
absolutely.
building classification, that was so critical before you got started. Here, it's not as critical, but I think one of the biggest things, and it goes back to the the overall development of the territory, is having a building code that is
Yeah.
current.
Mhm.
Um, and we will most countries, as I think Lavina, you pointed this out, you kind of always lagging behind, but you don't want to be
Right.
so far behind
Yeah.
No.
that
Yeah.
catching up is virtually impossible. We
Mm-hmm.
want we have the opportunity, and we had it, I guess. Um, and priority shift and momentum moves in different directions. Um, but we, again, as a collective, I think the architects and engineers in the BVI have an opportunity to be able to impress upon the government of the day
Mhm.
the importance of building codes,
Right.
and why they're necessary, why they're needed, um, and let's formally adopt something that we all feel good about and can access. There should be training how to find things in the code, so it's not just here's the
Right.
code and knock yourself out. There needs to be some way to find things, a process,
Yeah.
because look, those some of those codes are
They're
thousands of
weighty.
pages. They're
Yeah.
weighty.
They're
Yeah, I
weighty.
mean
And
they're
Yes.
like
very
they're like
technical.
paperweights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I remember learning a lot of the
Not
same things
sketches.
Marvin
Yeah.
talked about when I was working on 50,000, 100,000 square foot, 200,000 square foot projects in the US. You started with not code analysis and code drawings. But the other thing I want to point out is there's no real need to reinvent the wheel. I know every territory is different, but you've got international building code, international structural code, international residential code, which is still separate from the code that governs larger buildings. Um, Marlon again keeps telling me about the international electrical mechanical
So
codes.
any code we
So,
possibly want, we can find it. Basically.
exactly. When
Absolutely.
I was in California, what they did was they took the uniform building code and they made California amendments. So,
Mhm.
California is big on environmental protection and handicap accessibility. So they took the Uniform Building Code, which was a overall blanket
Yeah.
code, and they modified certain chapters for California.
Mhm.
Do we need to do that? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we can just say these are international standards.
Mhm.
They work great all over the world. Let us adopt them. And if we need to talk about exceptions, just like we do now, when you write to planning and ask for an exception on your setbacks if you need it, then people can, ask for an exception if they feel it's necessary. I mean, I happen to know that for larger buildings, the addressable fire system does go and get reviewed, I think, by the fire department. But as you say, there's no
Cool.
code.
Mhm.
So it's just practice for the time
Yeah.
period that people are in certain positions that say we need to have this practice.
Mhm.
I experienced this years ago when I first came here. When Louis Potter was head of planning, there were a set of guidelines that we were using that I thought actually were the planning code because that's what we always did. At this time, I was
Where
working for
to?
OBMI, so I was working with Marvin, and we always referenced them. And then the head of planning changed, and I referenced these guidelines in the next project I sent in, and they said, no, we don't use those. Right. And that's when I became aware of the 1972, which has different setbacks and different
Mhm.
requirements. So
Yeah.
a lot of it is practice and people try best practices in place, but that stuff can change with the next person that's in the job.
Yeah.
So how does that protect
Yeah.
public health and
Public health
safety?
and safety.
And to Marvin's point, the functionality and aesthetics
Mhm.
of the built environment, if it's just depends on who's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bennett, what's your thoughts here? And also another point we need to mention that's lacking is about addressing disability.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, go ahead. I was just bringing
yeah.
up the topic.
Okay. We would go to that, but I was listening to that with interest.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was listening to that discussion about the codes with interest. I mean, and I agree. I think that there are, well, somebody mentioned the Uniform Building Code and so on. There are codes that cover a lot of the I was about to say architectural issues, but I mean, it's more than that. It covers electricity, it covers plumbing, it covers,
Yeah.
that sort of, those issues.
Mm-hmm.
What I would like to refer to do is something that was when back we were talking about earlier, and that is overall planning in general. And I'll go back to the issue of sewage in rural town.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we come ski, the sewer system in rural town was 90% an outhouse over the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're talking about 1970. It was an outhouse over the sea. There were no pipes or anything anywhere. And I said that because when Wickham Ski was put in, there was an attempt made, I suppose successful too, to put in the necessary infrastructure that was required. They put roads in, they put the plumbing in, they put the sewer lines in and things like that. Actually, I think they were pitch fiber or some asbestos cement or something like that. Because this was a long time ago. And I'm saying that because the system that was on Wickhamski, which I think was being referred to sometime earlier as the old system, was essentially a Wickhamski system that was put in for the Wickhamski development, that because they could no longer use the old houses over the sea, they had to put in lines and connect to the Wickhamski system.
Mm-hmm.
The Wickhamski system was on Wickhamski. It included a treatment plant right where there's a church there now. I trying to remember, apostolic faith somebody. And there was a treatment plant there, and they used to pump whatever used to. Anybody remembers this treatment
I
plant?
vaguely remember there was
all the way up
a plant there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. What happened after that? What happened after that is that when that plant malfunctioned, it didn't malfunction. It was just working in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
It foamed, and the foam started flying all over, and people were very upset with it. It wasn't a nice thing. They simply ran a line to Slaney because they weren't treating the sewage anymore, so they ran a line to Slaney. And basically, that's what we're still using. And one of my, I'm glad I got the opportunity to say it now. One of the things that almost wakes me up at night, that keeps me up at night, is what a mess we're in as far as sewage is concerned. Mm-hmm. We started putting in a sewer system 15, 20 years ago. I don't remember. Somebody could tell me. And this was supposed to be, no, not really. I mean, in the Eastern, we started doing that. But in Rotan, we started putting in a sewer system much later, maybe 10 years ago, which would have included the treatment plant that Bywater put in and all the rest of it. And that project has stalled. But one of the things about that is that the project has stalled. But I would ask if we knew what we were planning for then. And since I doubt that we knew what we were planning for then, 10 years later, if we look at that system again, I'm sure that system needs to be revised.
Graded, yeah.
Now, all the issues we have in porcelain, free bottom, and all the rest of it. And remember, I just said to you that the system that was put in on Wickham Ski was originally for Wickham Ski. If they're still using those old pipes, well, we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we really have a design source system that could actually deal with what we have now. The original Wickham Ski plan was planned for 2 floors each building. Now we're going 7 floors. That's a different scale. We include, and I hear the people who were mentioning the little lines they're putting in now. That's a big deal. Of course, it's a big deal. They mentioned in the development social security bill, the social security
Oh,
development, the housing
yeah.
development, and so on, and
Mm-hmm.
saying yes, of course we need that, but that's not the only development that's going on. There's development going on all around the Rotong area from Barbers Bay down to Slaney on the hills all the time, and it's going to continue to accelerate. The buildings are getting taller, and we're getting more buildings. And I don't know that we know what we have a sort system designed to deal with that, or to deal with what is going to be 25, 30, 40 years from now, because that's what you have to do with a source system. You
Mm-hmm.
don't go in every 10 years and dig up your pipes and put in new ones. That
Yeah.
doesn't work. You have to plan way down the road. So I hear talk about sewage, and I don't say anything because, but I'm scared. I don't know what's going on, and I don't think we know what's going on. And if we don't know what's going on, we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing about Eastern, but I live here and I don't want to say too much about it because that's also, I mean, a national
Yeah.
disgrace. That's the only thing I say about sewage. It's a national disgrace. And
Yeah.
I don't think the people responsible for moving these projects ahead realize what problems they talk about us doing things to the generations to come. I don't think they realize what they're doing to people, what problems we're going to be in 10 years from now if we continue to go and continue to do the things we're doing. But that again takes me back to the business of our overall plan.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where we're going.
Yeah.
We don't know what we want to do. We don't know what we hope to or what we want to look like 10 years from now. We need to sit down and do this.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
I mean, all the
Of
things we
course, we're going to
discussed.
make changes. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to make changes as we go along. But we need to do it.
Yeah. We have
and,
to
and
start.
we
We
just,
have to start with
and
something.
we're just not doing it. And we talk about just the physical stuff. We're not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I think we have a major problem. The codes, yeah, we can deal with the codes. As I say, we can adapt codes, we can find codes. We use the same materials and so on that people in, around us use. So we can adapt our codes.
Yeah.
But we can't adapt our plans for the country. But let me point out something else again. With the
Mm-hmm.
difficulty with planning, I have to throw in a little bit of sympathy for planners here. BVI, remember the Lantinia situation in BVI? Everything is privately owned land. Everybody is touchy about land. I spent a lot of my adult life watching politicians and helping to struggle to get, as the airport, we're close to the airport, struggling to get roads widened and all the rest of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
I tell people that all roads, and I'm guilty because I was the one in charge of doing a lot of the work, that all roads were designed by jackasses. The roads were designed by jackasses because most of all roads are upgraded horse tracks
House tracks. Yep.
or footpaths.
Mm-hmm.
That's what most of our roads are. And this has to do with land ownership and so on. That you can't easily go in and suggest to somebody that, look, it would be nice if we get a road to King Garden that has a decent gradient. So therefore, we're going to have to go. We did that already. There was a point where the UK government had promised to provide a decent road between Rotong and King Garden Bay with proper gradients, but they were always adamant in all the road developments that they used to fund, which was all the roads, that they weren't going to pay for land acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we had it all planned out, but we never got it done. We had plans for putting in a road pretty much at, I think they used to say the 250-foot contour that would pretty much ring the island. These are nice things you can think about. A nice flat road that went completely around the island at 250-foot contour. They're nice engineering solutions. But with all antenna, these things don't work.
Yeah.
And I'm just suggesting that to say that planning in BVI is going to run into those problems. Somebody mentioned it. You can plan all you want as long as you don't come near my property. And when we all say that, there
Yeah.
will be no planning.
Yeah.
But we have to somehow get past these situations.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about how steep our roads are, how narrow they are, how they're winding, how they're this, how they're that. And I spent a lot of my life building these steep and winding roads. I'm not proud of the fact that they're steep and winding roads. I'm proud of the fact that we got roads at all. But, I would have much preferred if we had something different.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy road to use what the hymn says. but we have to do it,
Yeah.
and we're not making the effort. We need but it affects almost everything we do in South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
People, the politician is your friend or your cousin next door, and if it's going to hurt you, then he can't push it.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the kind of issues we face.
But
But we
you know
have to do
something.
these things if we're going to, eh? If we're
No,
going to
I was,
progress.
yeah, and that was what I was going to allude to. It seems as if there has to be a greater education process where we move away from being so self-centered and look at again the country, and not just for now but the next 25 years, what will be there. Because Marquis said it's like we put down pipes in the ground basically for sewage that we know we gonna outgrow them probably in the next 5-10 years when we do set it up and get on it. Because again, we're partially old, partially new right now. The plant, as far as I was hearing, wasn't working after the storms, and we've been discharging sewage into the environment. And I'm like, again, we kind of gone in, we become desensitized for whatever reason to these things being a problem. It is a problem,
Yeah, it's like we're going backwards with that problem.
So
Okay, Shane, I'm not going to say too much on this, but I mean, the plant, to me, it's a shame that the plant wasn't fixed from a hurricane till now. I can't think there's a logical reason. If we can build a high school in 6 months, we could fix a sewage plant in 3 years, man. Come on.
I think
But
so.
if there's probably, we could have fixed the plant. But my problem isn't so much the plant because that can be fixed. My problem is what we have in the ground.
Yeah.
I have grave doubts about what we have in the ground. But anyway, we will see.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, you see,
That's the end of my
the hour went quickly, like I mentioned. But I wanted to touch on probably two more things. When we're talking about regulation, I know, and again, this is so strange because there was an architect and engineer licensing, and Marvin, you correct me with whatever the correct name is for this, in terms of legislation that was being proposed, that similar to the electricians, you'd have to become licensed as an architect and an engineer. I don't recall similar being done for contractors as yet, or plumbers. But again, I guess this kind of speaks to where we're talking about designing things in a systemic way. So, as us as technical people, we like to think about systems. That if we're gonna have it for architects and engineers, I think it should be done for all the professionals that are in the construction industry, the building industry, because the plumber can do some things that could harm public health and safety in a building, the same as much as the architect or the engineer or the contractor, in that regard. So it has to be something. I don't know if it'll have to be the building codes stipulated and then these regulations come in after, or everything has to be done at the same time. But just throwing that out there as something for consideration, for the powers that be. And also, you guys, you can tune in on that and give us your thoughts. Marquise, you want to tackle that?
In terms of the registry for the architects,
Yeah, with the
yeah.
licensing and,
I
and and for all building professionals, period.
Well, I believe the architects, and I guess Lavina and Marvin would be able to speak on architects. I believe there is something for architects, as when you go to, if you submit a home to Tongue and Country, you have to be registered to an extent. I believe beyond architects, however, there has not been a lot of traction as for us engineers and where our stake lies in regard to the building process. And I know going back to some other colleagues have also mentioned the need for a contractor registry as well with the government. And that is something that I think was proposed a couple of years back. And again, no traction. Um, I think, lending to Lavina's point about the air quality, it ties into the need for these things. And I think we take it lightly because obviously a lot of homes are pretty standard. When I say that, like they look differently, but the bones are basically the same. So as an engineer, I cut into most of the slabs here. You're gonna find 5/8 steel, and they're gonna be banded by either 1/2 inch, or we'll go down to the smaller size. But I think we have now taken that approach to, where certain things are standard. And like you say, we have gone from 2, 3, 4, 5 stories, and we're kind of ignoring, who are the persons now engineering these buildings. And, I know, and Lavina and Marvin could tell me, but I know architects and engineers, we don't always see eye to eye. So it's one of those kind of marriages where you have to have it, but it doesn't always go well. But I think it is necessary, especially not just engineering from a structural engineering point of view, but as you mentioned earlier, MEP. And MEP covers, for some persons who may not be sure, it's your mechanical, your electrical, and your plumbing. And your mechanical is basically like your HVAC, so your heating, ventilation, and your AC. Where we do not really require heating in the BVI, we require AC, but that one V is what Lavina was talking about, was ventilation. But if you created a registry and you created where certain buildings, even if you say not maybe residential home, but buildings would require engineer, and the engineer would need to be licensed, like how maybe Marvin is licensed. So whereas if I submit a drawing to the Tongue and Country Planning Department or the Building Authority Department, I cannot submit it from just some regular Joe on the street. I would have to get, let's say, Lavina or Marvin, because they have they're registered entities with the Tongue and Country Planning Department. But the ball has been dropped over the years with the engineering aspect, and who is engineering these buildings and what are their backgrounds and certain things like that. So it is crucial for us, along with the codes, to get the licensing corrected. That would be my 2 cents.
Okay.
I mean, our current registration, Shaina, is our current the draft legislation, which I think was included in the timeline given by the governor. I think the message from the throne.
Or the speech from the throne this year.
Speech from the throne. Yes.
Yes, I did hear it.
Sorry,
We
I
voted
do
in
that.
many speeches from the thrones, Marvin.
Why does it have to be? Anyway, let me stop. So this is really positive for us, right? This is really, I think, as far along as our legislation, as our draft legislation has gone since its inception, which I think dates back to 2014 as the most recent. But this legislation has been in the work since the early, maybe mid to late 90s, and it was stalled for several reasons. But we are at the cusp of it being enacted. It's going to be read in the House hopefully this year. My fear is that it won't make it. Elections come around, and who knows what happens, and we're back to square one. Because this is what has happened for three three election cycles, where we were right there on the cusp. And so I in my capacity, I try to apply a bit of pressure to the powers that be about the importance of it, along with our members. Lavina is a member of our association, to impress upon the House of Assembly its importance to bring it perhaps in the forefront. But there is a cabinet schedule, and you have to hop on the schedule. Hopefully, it gets there soon. But it does include architects, structural engineers, mechanical engineers. It does need to, I think, grow to include other disciplines. I guess it's that sort of creep before you can walk type thing. But we're excited about the potential of it. A lot of our legislation is trying to also protect our local architects and engineers. A lot of the work that, particularly after the hurricane, that was done, I mean, new build and renovation work was done by outside firms. Is there a registry at planning? Yes. can I say that it's always looked at prior, when a submission comes to? I don't know. I'm not in that department on the onboarding of a project. But a big part of what we're trying to achieve in our legislation is protecting our engineers, our architects, our industry, from and look, there's nothing wrong in overseas design firms, but the reality is if they want to work in the BVI, they have to work with a local firm. That's part of what I think we have in the legislation. So at least we are a part of the process. We, the money from whatever fees that are generated, obviously we know is that's part of the overall economy. It stays here, it's circulated here. So we're hoping that happens really soon, Shaina.
Okay. and right alongside of it now again, what was missing, I think, from the speech of the throne was this building code that has been discussed for many decades now. That again, especially after the 2017 hurricane, should have been top priority with all the rebuilding that we saw where they merged building authority and the development authority under tongue and country planning. So that definitely was a move to hopefully make the whole planning process more efficient, because then those two entities are now under the same management. So, but the key component for me is that building code, and from there now again licensing of the professionals that actually work according to make sure that they have a certain level of capacity in what
I mean, you have the codes.
If something drops, whether it's a bridge collapses or a building or a house collapses, you want to do these things.
Yeah,
we need to be proactive. Very key. All right, guys. So we have to wrap up. But the last thing I want us to touch on, I don't know how much you guys are familiar with it, but one of the key things for us going forward again in the next 15 20 years is climate change, and whether or not we're going to have any land to build on down below, or all of us are going to be up around the ridge road at the 250 contour that Bennet just referred to because sea levels have risen and all that stuff are happening. So I don't know if we've had a study done. I think there might have been some type of study done, because I remember hearing something about, how much of Anigada might disappear. But that's something definitely for us that we have to keep in mind with any development plan that we do. That climate change is real, whether we want to admit it or not, and there's no way to dewater the ocean, because if it starts to rise, it's gonna keep coming up. And we can't raise that. At least as engineers, we haven't figured it out yet, Marquise. But it may be something we look at. But this is seriously, it's going to be a serious consideration that we have to start to talk about. So, what are your thoughts? We'll close on that in terms of what are your thoughts in terms of climate change and our development, and how we move forward.
I would start, and I would say
I'll
Bennet.
Yeah, okay. Before I go to that, I'd say something about licensing thing. And that is, I think that we have not sold the idea, we have not sold the public on the benefits to the public of these licensing regimes. And I wouldn't really go any further. Even in the discussion there, I hold the idea about protecting the local industry. That's fine. But I think we have to make people know that it is as important as any other licensing for any kind of professional, even a taxi driver or a truck driver. I mean, it's important to protect the consumers, not only to protect the professionals. Okay, now, climate change. I think that between the DDM or planning or somebody produced a hazard map, or has produced hazard maps within recent times that deals to some extent with climate change. I am not too sure. I'm not familiar with them, but maybe we could follow up on that. So I think it has been given some thought. Climate change, like everything else, there are people who still believe that the world is flat, and they can prove it to you very quickly. I feel the same way about climate change. I don't think a lot of us are convinced that it is a serious issue. So therein we have a problem. But having said that, I don't know that we really understand. Sea level rise is one thing, but a lot of the effects go way beyond in what the design work that we do and so on. So it affects food production, it affects fisheries, it affects all sorts of things. I would say I don't know if it's something that we should panic on, but I think generally as a country we need to get a better understanding of what it involves, not just in our professions. And I don't think we have done that yet. But I believe some effort has been made and some effort is being made. So I'm waiting and seeing.
Okay. All right. Awesome. I think
Yeah,
Marvin?
that's all right.
Yeah, I think resilience. We have to be more resilient. Obviously, climate change is upon us. It's gonna. I don't know if it's gonna. If there's any improvement in the short term, it will probably get worse before it gets better. When the powers that be, and I mean all powers, global, truly come together on the same page and treat the issue and give the issue the attention, the dire attention it needs. You know, we here in the BVI, we are as small as we are a car society. We drive everywhere. When we don't have to sometimes. I mean, we can walk, and I must commend Honorable Reimer for these and his team in the ministry for this sort of
The shuttle.
electric shuttles that are around town. I think, and I see people in them. I mean, people are using these shuttles. I'm really happy to see that. But we have to get cars out of town. We make it more of a pedestrian friendly city. I think the traffic turnaround had some benefits to it, but I think it was more dealing with traffic. It was about car moving and focusing on cars and traffic, and we missed, I think, the bigger picture and opportunity, I should say, to look at road town in totality of not just a way to get people in and out or vehicles, but green spaces, friendly green spaces, more sustainable development, just more attractive buildings. Just again, I mean, I work on Main Street. For some reason, Main Street has now become, it's like a racetrack. I mean, cars are zooming down Main Street in this one way heading west, whereas when it was heading east, back into town, it was a bit of a slow meandering drive from the commercial court up to Creekies. Trust me, it is, and I'm saying this because I experience this every day. I park by the Methodist Church, and I know I'm straying off topic a bit, but I'm just crossing the street to my door. I'm really taking my life into my own hands, and that was not that way before the traffic turnaround. So again, we focused more on cars, and that goes back to the broader issue of climate. We have to, I think, minimize our dependency on vehicles. And I think if we can start that from a local standpoint of, and I'm not advocating the no vehicles in road town at all, but I think we do need to minimize the amount of vehicles that are in road town. I think there are several plans afoot about parking structures on the outskirts of town, and people are bust in, and or even Main Street being completely pedestrian, which I highly advocate. But if we can minimize the amount of cars in town, minimize our dependency on fossil fuels by minimizing the amount of vehicles, then we can do our own part. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other things we can do, waste management, minimizing what we import, how much we import. There's a lot of things we can do, and that is probably another show, to be honest with you, Shaina. But you're probably already aware of that.
Yeah. No, that's Dave. So, but I think that's also very important to mention though, because a lot of times we hear about climate change and what needs to be done, and we sometimes feel it's for other countries to do, but we also have a role to play. I think because every little bit counts in my view.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not one of the bigger polluters, but just to show persons sometimes how our eyes catch things. I came around Havers on my way home this afternoon, and it's like I paused because I looked up on the hillside, and it was the exhaust from the electricity plant, the fire from the
Yeah.
landfill, and the dust from the quarry. And the same thing that we talked about now, you have commercial buildings and residents in that same space, and they're taking in this air.
Yes.
Pollution is always all around, and we really have to become, I think, a lot more conscious of it, and how it's affecting us here locally, not just the planet overall. So that's a good point that you raised. So
I,
you
I
walk.
will. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that some of the recent moves locally towards encouraging solar and encouraging electric vehicles are very positive. I think it would be great to see even greater moves towards encouraging clean energy in the general provision of energy, like you mentioned, the electricity plant. And I know they had to do a lot of work fairly recently in terms of, upgrading those facilities. Um, the cost of oil, right now through the roof, of course, increasing energy costs. And if we are simply using more and more of it, that's not going to help us, and it's not going to help the world as a whole
Mhm.
deal with climate change, deal with um, the issues that we're facing. So I'm encouraged by the recent moves towards electric vehicles and solar energy. Interestingly enough, one of the things that I didn't understand when I moved to the BVI, our decentralized water system, where everyone has cisterns, coming from places that always had centralized water systems. But I came to realize, especially after Hurricane Irma, that having a decentralized system can really help you in a time when all the networks and all the wires and all the pipes are gone. you know so something similar to that, where you have a decentralized solar energy system, where you look at having, and hopefully the costs will come down because the costs are still quite prohibitive, where each home can provide its own energy,
Mhm.
so that in addition to the centralized system, in an emergency, in another Hurricane Irma, we can still have power and still function,
Mhm.
um, while that system is repaired. We would be using less fossil fuels, we'd be polluting less. Although I know there are concerns about some of the materials that go into solar panels as well. But I think that's one of the things that we can definitely look at.
Yeah.
Sometimes a decentralized system in an emergency works better than a centralized system that depends on one producer.
Yeah.
So that'll definitely help us with our resilience,
Mhm.
um, and is a path that I'm encouraged to see growing, and I'd like to see grow a whole lot more as we go forward.
Yeah, I like to see each island have its own um power plants, and then basically they interconnected, so you have a super grid that you
Mhm.
always have redundancy. But again, that's just me. All right, Maggie.
Resiliency.
Yeah, that's how you would build it, because just unlike Virgin Gorda and Igata need to have their own, in my mind, have their own power supply, but they're all integrated that if one goes down, they can get power from someplace else until they get back online. So, because it's already out there as a network, it's just a matter of subdividing it. Eh? So, Marquise, what's your thoughts? Are we going to flood out?
So it's interesting that you asked if we're going to flood out. And I think everyone else on the panel has made great suggestions to reduce the footprint or carbon footprint.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't lament on that. I would more look at the resilience. And I think drainage would be the one thing that I would improve, because as small as we are and as much as we could reduce our footprint, larger countries and their lack of maybe interest in certain things will definitely affect us. So as we still, we share waters, we share sky, and all of that, we share the ozone system. So I believe we need to improve on our drainage. So when you have events like the August floods, or we go back to the November rains, or we go back to even before that, I think we need to realize that periodically, we're going to get these events. I mean, something like Orma, I mean,
We
just
can't blame
building,
them.
improving and building would assist, but
Yeah.
drainage is what I think caused a lot of damage for the other events. And I think we need to look specifically at why, you're in Rotown and maybe in the August floods, Marvin shouldn't see a freezer floating down Main Street past his office. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things that I personally think has contributed heavily to this, well, two things is one, we have done a lot of land reclamation, and I don't think we have understood, covering the ponds and stuff like that that we have done and going out to see, the adverse effects. And I'm not against land reclamation, but I think you just have to take certain things into consideration when you're doing it. I find as though a lot of land that we have reclaimed, at least in my time, the land seems higher, like a higher elevation than inland. So let's say if Marvin just referenced Main Street. So if we go to Main Street and you step out to where we reclaim, where we park, it
Yeah.
seems to be higher. So the surface water kind of
That's the water.
stagnates
Yeah.
because the land should actually be gradually getting lower. Just following the natural topography of any landmass, but it stagnates. And then one of the other problems I've come to realize are drains, or as we call them, guts. They empty at sea level. So you have events where you have maybe like a full moon, like the August floods were around a full moon, and you have a high tide, and the water can't go anywhere because if anyone again walks around Rotom, especially in the area where we have the parking by Sunny Caribbean, on any common day, you have water that kind of comes all the way up into that drain. So
Yeah.
how do you expect that if we have a mass flow of water leaving the area,
Yeah.
how is it going to alleviate? The drain should actually be at least maybe at 5 or 6 feet above sea level and fall off versus allowing sea level to come back. And I know it's a similar situation with postal area there where Delta is, the water comes too far up in the drain. So, like I said, I think we need to look at our drainage because as much as we're trying to reduce our carbon footprints, we will get a couple of these events. And the faster that we can alleviate the water back out, it will be the better. When the water starts to bottleneck and you get that pressure,
Yeah.
it is
So
where it causes a lot of damages. And I think we could try to at least be proactive and try to deal with drainage, and not just people gonna be like, oh well, we need to clean the drains and we need to clean the guts. Yeah, that's the first step, but the second step is really watching our levels and watching
the
these
actual
developments.
design of them.
Yeah, and then going into our plan. And I think, not to belabor the point, but even like we were talking about building, I find we have a kind of philosophy here where if I come onto a site, let's say I am at the top of a hill and they have a drainage issue, I alleviate the water down onto the next property, and then from there it's for that property owner to alleviate the water down. It isn't a plan. So it's like, if the water is coming to me, I put up a retaining wall, I change the trajectory of the water. And then when Marvin comes to design for my neighbor, now he has to deal with all of this water now that I am now putting on my neighbor because I don't want it. So then he has to design the property in a way to alleviate the water onto the next property in a sense. And that in itself creates problem. So as with global warming, we will probably get more rainfall, and I just preach drainage. That would be my 2 cents.
All right. Thank you. Well, I think we covered all the bases now with that. So we got it all done. Lavina just sent me a message. She was saying we need retention ponds, and definitely, because that's something I thought about. Some conversation I had where, again, in the US, whenever they do developments, and I guess because of code, they require you to have areas basically to hold that water. So people see them around the highways and probably think they're nice and pretty, but they actually have a very important function to keep the roads dry during the rain and even after, for them to dry very quickly. Well, guys, I thank you for coming through. Again, we could talk all night about this type of stuff, but I do hope that our viewers and our audiences got a lot of takeaways in terms of the importance of how we have to prioritize our development. And we do need to do a lot of things, but we can't do everything at the same time. And there are some crucial issues, regardless of how long standing they've been, that really need to be addressed before they become a 5 alarm fire, as my cousin Bennett basically puts it, because it's keeping him up at night. So we want to make sure we're not basically kicking the can down the road and not doing what we need to do to ensure the success basically of the next generation, because it's going to be absolutely necessary that we start making some of the hard decisions, I think, that are going to help us progress the country from that physical infrastructure standpoint and whatever else that was there. And Asia said in the comments, maintenance. That's always going to be key, because again, we could build, very pretty, well engineered, all of that good stuff. But if we're not maintaining our buildings, and this goes for both private owners as well as public buildings, we have to do the maintenance that's necessary also to extend the life of the infrastructure, so we're not patching the same part of the road and digging up the same water pipe every 2 months. I'm just saying. So that's where we'll leave it. So until next time, a word of encouragement. I looked this one up. The need for growth, for development, for change is fundamental for life. So I know a lot of times, again, guys, when people hear about the building code, they get anxious because they're thinking about, the government is trying to stop them from doing what, they want to do with their property. But it really is all about public health and safety for all of us, because you wouldn't want to put up a building and then, persons get injured as a result of poor construction or faulty design, because we aren't, making sure that we set standards. It's the same thing for doctors, like Bennett says, any professional that's dealing with public care, you need to have to we have to make sure that we do that. So let's embrace the change. Again, we still have a window of opportunity, I think, since 2017 to make those necessary changes that we need to make our development modus operandi, as it were, and getting those things in place. So if you're first time viewing us here, please like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, so that when we are planning to go live again, you will get the notification. And I am your host. Until next time, Shaina Smith Archer saying, let's continue the change in conversation for a better Virgin Islands. Have a good one.